Chapter 48, The Fuss Budget, Hanyu's POV. Hanyu woke to feel the mattress shifting as Antony got out of bed. He hadn't expected to be allowed back in his master's bed last night, but as soon as Antony had slid under the blankets, he'd shot Hanyu an impatient glare. "Well, do you plan to keep me waiting for 1 hour or 2?" the god had snapped. Antony hadn't even squirmed when Hanyu wrapped his arms around him an instant later. Hanyu had drifted off, still wondering what he'd done to deserve this particular master. He wondered it anew as he woke to Antony slipping out of the bed. The priest had made it seem as if he would be lucky to wake up at all if he ever dared to directly disobey a god, never mind waking up in that same god's bed, hogging the bed in fact, having been held and spoiled and comforted following his crime. He would be extra good today, he vowed. Though, when he thought of his usual standard of behavior, he reflected that he should perhaps simply aim for good. That alone might be enough to kill even his immortal god with shock. "Good morning," he said, hoisting himself up on his elbows. He'd been expecting Antony to jump. Perhaps he wanted a bit of revenge for the startling way the god always woke up? So much for being good. However, Antony didn't even turn away from the wardrobe, where he was tucking his shirt into his trousers. "Good morning, Hanyu," his master replied, totally unsurprised. "I would ask whether you slept well, but the snorers assured me that you did." Hanyu's belly squeezed with remorse. "Did I keep you awake?" "Not all that much." Antony waved a dismissive hand, though he still hadn't turned. "It's not as if I needed a great deal of sleep. I'm just glad that you weren't kept awake by your ordeal yesterday." "Oh, gods, no!" Hanyu had been asleep almost as soon as he'd pulled Antony against his chest. He cringed once he realized what he'd said. It still felt rude to swear by Antony when the god was standing right there, clasping his belt around his narrow hips. At least Antony didn't seem bothered. He turned and scowled at Hanyu, but it was his reflexive scowl, not a sign of actual anger. Hanyu was learning the difference. "We're going back to Theo's rooms today to see whether she's willing to help with feeding," the god informed him. "Your breakfast will be here any minute, so eat quickly, all right?" "All right." Hanyu stretched luxuriously and padded off to the washroom. He dressed quickly to ensure that he would be ready to answer the door. The knock came just as he was tying back his hair. "I've got it!" he hollered. He let the ribbon fall and dashed for the door so quickly that Antony had to dive, lightning quick, to get out of his path. The god was still swearing creatively at his back when Hanyu pulled open the door and saw, as he had hoped and dreaded, Edgy. The beautiful man looked a little less beautiful today. There was a hint of red around his lovely dark eyes, and his gorgeous face was drawn and pale. He looked as if he hadn't slept well. "Good morning, Hanyu," he said, perfectly polite and icy cold as he extended the tray. "I'm so glad to see you!" Hanyu burst out, and Edgy's tired eyes widened a little. "I went looking for you yesterday to apologize. I was awful, and I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" "Hanyu, stop that," said Lord Antony at his back. Hanyu hadn't heard the god coming to stand behind him, but there he was. Edgy paled further and started to kneel, but Antony stopped him with a gesture, leaving Hanyu to gate back and forth between the two of them. "I imagine you heard some of what your master and I discussed yesterday," Antony said. Edgy's knuckles had gone white where he gripped the tray, and he looked miserable? Mutinous? Hanyu didn't know the other man's face well enough to judge. Either way, he dipped his chin in affirmation. "Forgive me, my lord," he said. "It was not my intention to eavesdrop." "You could hardly help it," Antony replied. Antony knew his god better than he knew Edgy, so he could more easily detect Antony's discomfort with the conversation. His chin was raised, his feet planted, and his chest puffed out, the stance he always took when he was ill at ease. Even his voice was so level that Hanyu was sure he was working hard not to snap and growl. "I know you're busy right now," Antony said, "but come by when you have some time, will you? Felix was right, though I was in too much of a temper to see it. I'm the one who owes you an apology, not Hanyu. Take your food, boy." It took Hanyu a long moment to realize that this last sentence was directed at him. He obeyed, thoroughly confused. Edgy relinquished the tray with a dazed look. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. After a few agonizing moments of this, Antony seemed to take pity on the man and began to shut the door. "I'm glad you're with Felix now. We'll see you later, all right?" Then the door was closed, and the god turned to look at Hanyu. Hanyu, for his part, realized that his jaw was sagging open and closed it. "What?" Antony demanded waspishly. "Eat your food before it gets cold, will you?" "All right." Hanyu sat down, but he didn't have any real intention of eating until his curiosity was sated. What did you mean about apologizing to him? Antony grunted. What does it sound like I meant? How many meanings does apologize have? But apologize for what? Hanyu pressed. Why would you apologize to an attendant? Why are you surprised? All I've done this week is apologize to you, the god grumbled. But that's because I'm hysterical, Hanyu pointed out. I melt down and cry, and then you feel guilty. Edgy isn't crying. Antony heaved a cavernous sigh. Well, all right, you're not good at hiding when I've hurt your feelings or scared you, but that's good, because Edgy is apparently excellent at hiding those things, so I had no idea I was doing anything wrong until Felix told me. That makes for an awfully late apology. Interesting. This was yet another thing Hanyu had been scolded and punished for back at the temple that his master apparently liked about him. Why didn't he just tell the priest to train the offerings differently if they weren't doing it the way he wanted? As for Edgy, Hanyu couldn't imagine that his gentle, forgiving god would have done anything violent or willfully cruel to him, so that left... Are you apologizing for ignoring him? Hanyu asked. Antony shot him a glare. How did you know about that? He told me. He wanted to make sure I didn't have too many expectations about intimate service and things, so he told me about how you never talked to him. I think he meant to be kind. I'm sure he did. Antony grumbled something Hanyu couldn't quite hear. Then, would it have been so bad if I hadn't paid much attention to you? Hanyu couldn't hold back a wince. It would have been awful! Really? Oh, yes! Hanyu nodded vigorously. But you see all your friends when you exercise. I wouldn't be your only chance to socialize. Sure, but that's not every day, Hanyu argued. And even when it is, it's only for a few hours. I spend most of my time here with you. All that time just sitting around, wondering what you were thinking and if you were angry with me, and if I would get in trouble if I accidentally made a sound, trying to figure out if it would be better to be out where you could see me, or if the sight of me was annoying you and I should just hide in the closet. I would be a wreck, Antony groaned. But why spend all that time fretting about me? Why not read or draw or work out mathematical equations or do absolutely anything else? Not everyone's hobbies are quiet, Hanyu said. Anyhow, if you weren't talking to me, how would I know that I was allowed? We're supposed to have our attention on our masters whenever we're in their presence. I would just sit there and worry and wonder what I did wrong. Oh. There was a new note in the god's voice, quiet and stricken. For 6 years. That does sound awful, doesn't it? It really does. Hanyu thought he would have gone mad. Antony started pacing. Damn it! It's been for years now, centuries even. Damn it! He paced a while longer in silence, only breaking from his thoughts to toss a grouchy, "Eat your damn food, will you?" in Hanyu's direction. His curiosity sated, Hanyu was happy to obey. It was hard-boiled eggs and shredded, perfectly seasoned potatoes today. He hadn't known what a potato was the first time one had appeared on his plate, but they were quickly becoming one of his favorites. The potatoes were good for distracting him from his thoughts. On the one hand, he was glad that Antony planned to apologize to Edgy, even though that probably made him a terrible offering. It proved what Antony's treatment of Asao had already led him to believe. Antony didn't want any of the humans to be hurt or mistreated. Hanyu wasn't a fluke. He was just the only human Antony had met in a long time who was ill-mannered enough to make a fuss when he was frightened or his feelings were wounded. On the other hand, Hanyu was gratified to be the exception. Beautiful Edgy hadn't won Antony's attention or a, however chaste, place in his bed, and neither had any number of others. It had been him, Hanyu, the ill-mannered, overexcited one who was always in trouble and was placed in the back row. Everyone had been wrong about him. He was special and important and worthy after all, and when Antony told the temple of his decision, they would all know it. The high priest would be sorry he'd ever even considered selling him. And didn't that just make Hanyu awful? What kind of person would take even the least satisfaction from something that had caused so much suffering to his predecessors? He remembered Asao saying that Hanyu was never jealous and felt himself flush with shame. As soon as he finished his meal, Antony was pulling on his boots. The god must have been hungry, Hanyu realized with a fresh rush of shame. It had been 3 days since he'd fed from Kenta, and after Hanyu's overreaction, his master probably hadn't dared to seek other means of sating himself again. However, the closer they got to Lord Theodora's rooms, the more the god's enthusiasm for the venture seemed to flag. Before long, Hanyu could think of no words for his demeanor except fussing. "Do you feel well enough for this?" Antony asked as he knocked on the door. "It's all right if you don't. We can do this another day." "I'm fine," Hanyu insisted for the 4th or 5th time. He was losing count. Antony barreled ahead as if he hadn't heard. "Because yesterday was terribly stressful for you. Wouldn't you rather just read? You could just read. We never learned whether the Duke told the princess that they wanted their sham engagement to be real." "Antony!" Hanyu's exasperated, and probably highly improper reply was mercifully cut short when the door opened. "My Lord Antony!" It was the older, haughty one. Hanyu didn't remember his name. "Hello." Antony sounded uncomfortable, the way he always did when he talked to humans that weren't Hanyu. "Joji, isn't it?" "Yes, indeed." The old man practically glowed at the recognition. "My lord does me too much honor. Forgive me for not greeting you properly, but my master, Lord Theodora, has forbidden me from kneeling." "It's fine," Antony said. At the same moment, Lord Theodora appeared behind Joji and said, "Your knees can't handle it anymore, which you would admit if you weren't so stubborn." Had she been in the common room, or just darted from Chihiro's bedside with that otherworldly speed? Either way, she looked tidy but incredibly tired. The smile she offered first to Antony, then to Hanyu, was no less warm than usual, despite the dark circles under her eyes. "My knees pain me far less than my shame at offering an insolent greeting to the Lord of the Gods," Joji grumbled, but he didn't sound as if he had much hope of swaying his master. Indeed, she was implacable. "Then we'll have Julia come by with a splint for your shame. It'll be much smaller than splints for your knees. Come in, you two." Hanyu and his god obeyed the summons. Once inside, Hanyu saw that the big table was half full. 7 men sat before their breakfasts, ranging in age from Joji, whose meal sat before what must have been his recently vacated chair, to Kenta, who offered a cheery little wave. Lord Theodora led them back to Chihiro's room, where the old man snored softly and Bunto was sitting in the big soft chair. When he looked up and saw them, his face was accusing. "Why aren't you in bed, Theo? My lord?" he demanded in a whisper as he got up from the chair. "Some guests arrived," Lord Theodora said dismissively. "Anyhow, I wasn't asleep yet. Go on, sit back down." "Antony won't insist on proprieties. Will you, Antony?" It sounded less like a question than an order, and Antony shook his head obediently. Bunta, however, did not sit. "You need to sleep sooner or later," he told Lord Theodora. "Even if your body doesn't need it, your mind needs a break from all this." "I'll sleep when I'm dead," Lord Theodora replied with a bitter, humorless laugh that Hanyu never would have expected to hear from the shy god. Antony frowned. "Theo." "Oh, don't you start." She fluttered her hands as if she was batting away a few insects. "Did you two come for reading?" "No, well, not just that." Hanyu saw his master dart a look at Bunta. "Perhaps the 3 of us could speak privately?" "Go on, Bunta," Lord Theodora sighed. "Why don't you go have breakfast with Zenji?" Bunta snorted. "He won't be eating for another hour. It's against his morals to eat before he's fussed so much his voice is gone." "Zenji?" Antony had gone rigid and miserable beside him, and Hanyu longed to reach out and grab his hand. "Would this be the same Zenji who, lived with me?" Bunta's gaze was cold as he inclined his head. "The same. He'll be honored to hear that my lord remembers his name." "Surprised and honored." "I see." Antony's shoulders slumped, and as Bunta stalked away, Hanyu could almost see his god tacking another name onto his apologies owed list. Lord Marcus must have been lying about Antony's mother and previous lovers. No god who would submit to being spoken to in such a way with only a guilty expression could have done all that. Still, Hanyu felt the words like a splinter in his mind.